The cargo ship screamed through the atmosphere of Talon 9, its hull glowing red from the solar storm that had torn through the system without warning. David Reed gripped the controls with white knuckles, fighting against forces that wanted to rip his vessel apart. Warning lights painted his face in shades of crimson and amber as the ground rushed up to meet him. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. Metal shrieked and buckled. Systems went dark one by one until only emergency power remained. David sat in the sudden silence, tasting blood where he had bitten his tongue. His hands shook as he ran through the damage assessment. The ship was alive, barely, but it would not fly again without serious repairs. He stepped out into the harsh sunlight of the frontier planet. Rocky canyons stretched in every direction, their walls carved by wind into strange shapes. The air was thin but breathable. His emergency beacon was transmitting, but the solar storm would delay any rescue for weeks. David grabbed his survival pack and began to explore. The sound reached him first. A weak whimper, almost human, but not quite. David followed it through a narrow passage between two massive boulders. What he found made him stop dead. The creature was massive, even lying down. Its body resembled a wolf but stood as tall as a horse. Gray fur covered powerful muscles, and its head was broader, more intelligent than any Earth canine. One of its hind legs was bent at a terrible angle, trapped beneath a pile of rocks. Deep wounds marked its flanks where something had attacked it. 3 smaller versions of the creature, huddled against a far wall. Cubs, David realized. They could not be more than a few weeks old. Their ribs showed through thin fur, and their eyes were glazed with hunger and fear. The mother lifted her head as David approached. Her lips pulled back, revealing teeth designed to tear flesh. But the growl was weak, and David saw something in her amber eyes that made him pause. Not just pain, recognition. She knew she was dying, and she knew her cubs would die with her. David should have walked away. Every survival manual ever written told him to avoid wounded predators. The colonial briefings had warned that Scarans were dangerous, territorial, and unpredictable. But he had spent 15 years flying cargo routes to forgotten planets, and he had learned one truth that no manual could teach him. Eyes never lied about suffering. He set down his pack slowly. The mother watched but did not growl again. David pulled out his emergency medical scanner and ran it over her body. The readings made him wince. Broken leg, cracked ribs, severe dehydration, and internal bleeding. Without treatment, she had maybe 2 days left. The cubs whimpered louder. David looked at them and made his decision. He spent the next hour carefully removing rocks from the mother's leg. She tensed with each movement but never tried to bite him. When the leg was free, David splinted it using carbon fiber strips from his emergency kit. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic foam and sealed the worst cuts with medical adhesive. The mother never took her eyes off him. When he finished, she made a sound deep in her chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. David chose to believe it was gratitude. Next came the cubs. They backed away as he approached, tiny growls bubbling from their throats. David opened a ration pack and tore the protein bar into small pieces. He placed them on the ground and stepped back. Hunger won over fear. The cubs darted forward and devoured the food in seconds. David returned to his ship and gathered supplies. He brought water containers, more food, thermal blankets, and a portable shelter. As the sun began to set, he erected the shelter near the injured mother. She watched every movement with those intelligent eyes. That night, David lay in his sleeping bag and stared at the stars through the shelter's transparent roof. The mother was less than 3 meters away, her breathing slow and steady. The cubs had curled against her side, finally sleeping peacefully. David knew he had changed something fundamental in his life, though he could not yet name what. In the darkness, he heard movement. The mother had lifted her head. For a long moment, human and Scaran regarded each other across the small space. Then she lowered her head again, resting it on her paws. But her body had shifted. Positioning herself between David and the canyon beyond, she was protecting him. David smiled despite his exhaustion and his fear and the impossible situation he now found himself in. He had crashed on an alien planet with a broken ship, limited supplies, and no immediate rescue. He had chosen to save a predator that could kill him with one bite. By every logical measure, he had made the wrong choice. But as sleep finally took him, David felt more certain of this decision than anything else in his life. The cubs woke him before dawn. They had ventured closer during the night, drawn by curiosity and the warmth of his thermal blanket. One of them, braver than its siblings, sniffed at his hand. David held perfectly still. The cub's nose was cold and wet against his skin. The mother watched this interaction without moving. David met her gaze and nodded slowly. A promise, though he did not know if she could understand. He would not abandon them. Not today, not tomorrow, not until they were safe. The sun rose over the canyon walls, painting everything gold. David stood and began planning. He had a ship to repair, a family to feed, and a rescue to delay. Life had just become very complicated, but as the cubs began to play in the morning light, tumbling over each other with small yips of joy, David discovered he did not mind one bit. 3 days had passed since David found the Scarron family in the canyon. The mother's leg was healing faster than he expected, though she still could not walk without limping. David had started calling her Silver because of the way sunlight caught her gray fur. She seemed to accept the name, her ears perking whenever he said it. The cubs were a different story. They had lost their fear of David completely and now treated him like a strange addition to their family. They chewed on his boots, climbed over his legs while he worked, and competed for his attention with small barks and playful growls. David found himself laughing more than he had in years. His ship was another matter. The main engine needed parts he did not have. The communication array was partially functional but could only send messages, not receive them. David had transmitted his location and situation to the nearest colony outpost. Help would come eventually, but the solar storms made travel dangerous. He was looking at 3 weeks minimum, possibly more. Silver watched him work on the ship with obvious intelligence. She understood that the vessel was important to him, just as she understood that he brought food and water at regular intervals. David began to suspect that Scarrons were far more sophisticated than the colonial reports suggested on the 4th morning. David discovered why Silver had been abandoned. He was inventorying his supplies when he heard growling from outside the ship. Not Silver's voice. Deeper, more aggressive. David grabbed his emergency flare gun and rushed to the cargo ramp. 5 Scarrons stood at the canyon entrance. They were larger than Silver, their fur darker, their stance radiating dominance. The leader was massive, his black mane bristling with authority. David did not need a translator to understand pack hierarchy. This was Silver's former leader. Silver had positioned herself between the approaching pack and the shelter where her cubs hid. Her injured leg shook with effort, but she did not back down. She snarled at the lead male, and he snarled back. The other pack members spread out, trying to flank her. David stepped forward before he could think better of it. He fired the flare gun into the air. The bright red explosion made the Scarrons jump back in surprise. They turned their attention to him, confused by this strange creature inserting itself into pack business. The lead male took a step toward David. Silver lunged forward and snapped her jaws inches from his face. The male recoiled, then focused on Silver with pure hatred. David understood then. This was personal. Silver had challenged him somehow, and he had come to finish her. David fired another flare between them. The male Scarron growled, but did not advance. The other pack members looked uncertain. They had never encountered a human defending a Scarron before. It violated everything they understood about the separation between species. For 5 tense minutes, everyone held position. David kept the flare gun raised. Silver remained between her cubs and the pack. The cubs stayed silent in their hiding place. Finally, the lead male turned and trotted away. The others followed, but they kept looking back. Clearly confused by what they had witnessed, when they disappeared from view, Silver collapsed. David ran to her side. She was shaking from exhaustion and pain. He checked her splint and found it still secure, but she had reopened one of her wounds. David cleaned and resealed it while Silver lay still, trusting him completely. That evening, David sat outside his ship and tried to make sense of what he had seen. He pulled up his datapad and searched through the colonial database for information on Scarens. Most of it was observation notes and warnings. But one report caught his attention. A xenobiologist named Dr. Amy Price had spent 6 months studying a Scaran pack from a distance. She noted that they practiced a form of survival selection. Injured or weak pack members were abandoned to die. The strong survived, the weak did not. It was brutal but effective in the harsh environment of Talon-9. But Dr. Price had also noted something else. In rare cases, a Scaran would refuse to abandon an injured packmate. These individuals were usually driven out or killed. The pack could not tolerate what they saw as weakness or sentimentality. David looked at Silver, who was grooming her cubs with careful licks. She had not abandoned them when pack law said she should. She had fought to protect them even when injured. And now her former pack wanted to kill her for that choice. David felt anger rise in his chest. What kind of species punished love and loyalty? But then he stopped himself. Humans had done the same throughout their history. Every culture had times when compassion was seen as weakness. Maybe the Scarens were not so different. Silver lifted her head and met his eyes. In that moment, David felt a connection that transcended species. They were both outcasts now. She had been cast out by her pack. He had separated himself from his own kind by choosing to help her. They were family in the way that mattered most. By choice and by shared struggle, the smallest cub wandered over to David and climbed into his lap. It curled into a ball and fell asleep, its tiny body warm against his chest. David stroked its soft fur and made a silent promise. He would protect this family. Whatever it took. That night, David heard howls in the distance. Silver heard them too. She rose to her feet, favoring her injured leg, and howled back. The sound was haunting and beautiful, echoing off the canyon walls. Other howls answered from different directions. David did not understand the language, but he sensed the meaning. Silver was calling out to others like her. Others who had been abandoned or cast out. Others who had chosen love over survival doctrine. And from across the canyons, they were answering. David looked up at the alien stars and wondered what he had started. He had wanted to save one family. But something larger was happening now, something that might change everything. The cubs slept peacefully, unaware of the revolution beginning around them. Silver stood watch, her gray fur silver in the moonlight. And David Reed, cargo pilot and accidental revolutionary, prepared for whatever would come next. 2 weeks after the first confrontation, David woke to find his camp surrounded by Scarens. His hand went to the flare gun beside his sleeping bag, but Silver made a soft chuffing sound that stopped him. These were not enemies. 7 Scarens sat in a loose circle around the camp. They were all injured in various ways. One had a scarred face with a missing eye. Another limped on 3 legs, the 4th ending in a stump. A third was painfully thin, ribs visible beneath patchy fur. They all watched David with the same cautious hope he had seen in Silver's eyes that first day. David realized what was happening. Silver's howls had been an invitation. She was gathering the unwanted, the abandoned, the ones who did not fit into the brutal efficiency of normal pack life. And they had come. Over the next few days more arrived. An elderly male who moved slowly but with dignity. A young female who had been attacked and left for dead. 2 siblings who refused to leave each other despite one being lame. David's small camp transformed into something else entirely. A sanctuary for outcasts. Feeding them became David's primary challenge. His rations were nearly gone, but the Scarens began to hunt cooperatively, and they shared their kills with him. David used his ship's sensors to track prey movements and relay the information through gestures and crude drawings. The Scarens learned quickly. Silver emerged as the natural leader. Despite her still healing leg, she organized hunting parties and settled disputes with calm authority. David watched in fascination as a new social structure took shape. This pack valued cooperation over dominance, healing over abandonment. Then his communication array crackled to life. A voice broke through the static, professional and crisp. "This is Captain Helen Brooks of the Colonial Transport Authority. We received your distress signal. Are you receiving this transmission? David hesitated before responding. He knew what would happen if he told them about the Scarens. Colonial policy was strict non-interference. He would be ordered to leave immediately, and Silver's pack would lose their only source of medical aid and tactical support. This is David Reed. I read you, Captain. My ship is damaged, but I am unharmed. Good news. We can reach you in 6 days. Prepare for extraction. 6 days. David looked at the Scarens gathered around his camp. Silver lay near the ship, her cubs playing nearby. The scarred male was teaching the young ones hunting techniques. The elderly Scaren was grooming a younger one who could not reach her own wounds. Captain, I need to delay that extraction. Silence. Then Brooks responded, her voice tight with confusion. Reed, repeat that. Did you say delay? Yes, Captain. I have a situation here that requires more time. What kind of situation? David made his choice. I am providing medical assistance to injured wildlife. They are dependent on my aid. I cannot abandon them. Another pause. Reed, you are not a veterinarian. You are a cargo pilot. Your ship can be repaired at the colony. Whatever animals you have found, they are not your responsibility. With respect, Captain, they are now. The transmission ended abruptly. David knew he had just complicated his life considerably. But when he looked at Silver and she met his gaze with understanding in her eyes, he felt no regret. That evening, the black-maned pack leader returned. This time he brought his entire pack, over 20 Scarens bristling with aggression. They had come to end this aberration, to eliminate the weak and restore natural order. David stood in front of his ship, flare gun in one hand, sonic deterrent in the other. Behind him, Silver's pack formed a defensive line. They were outnumbered 2-1, and half of Silver's pack could barely fight. But none of them backed down. The black-maned leader stopped at the canyon entrance. He roared a challenge that echoed off the stone walls. Silver roared back, and her pack joined in. The sound was defiant and proud, a declaration that they had every right to exist. The battle began without ceremony. The two packs crashed together in a fury of teeth and claws. David fired his flare gun into the charging mass, causing several attackers to veer away. He activated the sonic deterrent, and the high-pitched frequency made the Scarens closest to him recoil in pain. But there were too many. The black-maned pack pushed forward relentlessly. Silver fought beside David, protecting his flank even as enemies tried to overwhelm her. The elderly male Scaren threw himself at an attacker twice his size. Buying time for the younger ones to escape, David ran to his ship and activated the emergency systems. The landing thrusters ignited, sending a wave of superheated air across the canyon floor. Scarens from both packs scattered, yelping in surprise and pain. The heat barrier created a temporary separation dot in the sudden silence. David stood in the glowing heat shimmer and faced the black-maned leader. They stared at each other across the barrier. David saw calculation in the leader's eyes, a reassessment of threat and cost. Then Silver stepped forward to stand beside David. Blood matted her fur, and she was breathing hard, but she held her ground. One by one, the members of her pack joined them. The scarred male, the three-legged female, the thin youngster, the elderly male, all of them lined up beside the human who had chosen them. The black-maned leader snarled one last time. But he turned away, and his pack followed. They had not been defeated, but they had been stalemated. And perhaps that was enough for now. As the enemy pack disappeared into the canyon, David's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the rocky ground. Silver collapsed beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. Around them, the injured pack members tended to each other. Licking wounds and offering comfort, David looked up at the darkening sky. He had just made an enemy of the most powerful pack on this part of Talon 9. He had delayed his rescue and probably damaged his career. He was running out of supplies and medical equipment, but as the cubs climbed into his lap, and Silver's warm weight pressed against his side, David smiled. He had also found something precious, something worth fighting for. He had found family. Captain Helen Brooks arrived 4 days later with 2 other ships and a very stern expression. She found David in his camp, surrounded by 16 Scarens of various ages and conditions. Her security team immediately raised their weapons, but David stepped forward with his hands visible and empty. "Captain, please lower your weapons. These Scarens are not hostile." Brooks stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Reed, step away from the predators, now." "No," that single word hung in the air. Brooks's jaw tightened. "That was not a request, pilot." Silver moved to stand beside David. She did not growl or show aggression, but her message was clear. If they took David, they would have to go through her. The other Scarens spread out in a protective formation. "Captain," David said carefully, "I know how this looks, but I need you to trust me for 5 minutes. Let me explain what is happening here." Brooks glanced at her security team, then back at David. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes. David told her everything. The crash, finding Silver and the Cubs, learning about Scaran pack dynamics, the battles with the dominant pack. He showed her the medical scans, the data he had collected, the evidence of complex social behavior and intelligence. "They are not just animals, Captain. They think, they plan, they feel loyalty and compassion. Silver and her pack represent something revolutionary. They are challenging their own species' harsh survival culture. That is not your concern, Reed. Colonial policy is clear. We do not interfere with native species, but I am already interfering. If I leave now, the dominant pack will return and kill them all, including the Cubs." Brooks walked to the edge of the camp and stood in silence for a long moment. When she turned back, her expression had softened slightly. "I brought someone who insisted on coming. Dr. Amy Price." A woman in her 50s stepped forward from behind the security team. Her eyes went wide as she took in the scene. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I spent 6 months observing Scarens and never saw anything like this." David gestured to Silver. "Dr. Price, meet Silver and her pack. They have formed a new social model based on cooperation and mutual care." Price approached slowly, her scientific excitement overcoming her caution. She pulled out a scanner and began taking readings. Silver watched but did not move. The Cubs, curious about the new humans, ventured closer. "The pack structure is completely different," Price murmured, studying her scanner. "No dominance hierarchy. Instead, there is distributed leadership based on situation and skill. This female coordinates hunting while the older male handles conflict resolution. They are sharing resources equally." She looked up at David with something like awe. "You have triggered a cultural evolution. I just helped some injured creatures." "No," Price said firmly. "You did more than that. You showed them an alternative way to live. Humans cooperate across genetic lines. We care for our injured and elderly. We value compassion as strength. They saw that in you, and they chose to emulate it." Brooks was listening now, her military bearing softening. "Doctor, what would happen if Reed leaves?" "The dominant pack will view this new pack as a threat to their social order. They will attack again, and without Reed's technology and tactical assistance, the outcasts will be eliminated." "But Captain, if Reed stays..." Price's eyes gleamed with scientific passion. "We could be witnessing the birth of a new Scaran society. One that could eventually replace the brutal old ways. This could change everything for this species." Brooks looked at David. "You want to stay?" "Yes, Captain." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Brooks shook her head slowly. "You are asking me to allow a civilian to remain on an unstudied frontier planet with dangerous wildlife and no backup. I am asking you to let me finish what I started." The silence stretched. Then Brooks sighed. "Dr. Price, how long would you need to properly study this situation?" Price's face lit up. "At least 3 months for preliminary documentation. And you would need a liaison who already has the pack's trust." "It would be essential." Brooks turned back to David. "Reed, I am officially assigning you as Dr. Price's assistant for a xenobiological study. You will receive full support, including supplies, medical equipment, and regular communication checks. But understand this. If the situation becomes too dangerous, you evacuate immediately. No arguments, David felt relief wash over him. Understood, Captain. And Reed? Your cargo company is going to be very unhappy about this delay. They will survive without me. Brooks almost smiled. I will smooth things over with them. Officially, you are now working for the Colonial Science Division. She paused, watching Silver and her pack. Take care of them, Reed. They chose to trust you. Do not make them regret it. Over the next weeks, the camp transformed into a proper research station. Dr. Price brought equipment, supplies, and 2 assistant researchers. They documented everything: hunting patterns, social interactions, communication methods, healing practices, but more importantly, more Scarens came. Word spread through methods David did not fully understand. Outcasts from other packs arrived seeking sanctuary. Some were injured. Others were simply different, unable to fit into the rigid structures of traditional pack life. Silver's pack grew to 30 members. They developed new signals and strategies. The elderly Scaren, whom David called Gray, became a teacher for the young. The scarred one-eyed female, Swift, led hunts with brilliant tactical thinking. The 3-legged male, Steady, watched over the cubs and kept them safe, and through it all, Silver remained the heart of the pack. She was not the strongest or the fastest, but she held them together with steady leadership and unwavering loyalty. When disputes arose, she mediated. When food was scarce, she ate last. When danger threatened, she stood first. David watched her with growing respect. She was building something new, something better. And somehow, he had become part of it. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the canyon, David sat with Silver overlooking the camp. The cubs, now half-grown, played with the younger pack members. Dr. Price and her team documented everything with quiet enthusiasm. Silver leaned against David's side, a gesture of trust and affection. He scratched behind her ears, and she made that almost purring sound she reserved for contentment. We did it, David said softly. We built something good. Silver turned her head to look at him, and David could have sworn she understood every word. The black-maned pack leader returned 6 weeks after Dr. Price arrived, but this time he came alone. David was repairing a solar panel when Silver's warning growl alerted him. The massive Scaren stood at the canyon entrance, not advancing, not threatening. Just waiting. Silver rose and walked forward slowly. David grabbed his flare gun but did not raise it. This felt different from before. The leader's body language was not aggressive. He seemed almost uncertain. The 2 Scarens faced each other 10 meters apart. The leader made a low rumbling sound, complex and nuanced. Silver responded in kind. David watched the exchange, wishing desperately that he could understand their language. Dr. Price appeared beside him, her recording equipment already running. This is unprecedented, she whispered. That is a formal challenge protocol, but he is not executing it. He is asking something. The conversation continued for several minutes. Then Silver turned and looked at David. She barked once, a clear request. David walked forward slowly until he stood beside her. The black-maned leader studied him with intelligent yellow eyes. I think he wants to understand, Price said from behind them. He wants to know what makes your pack different. David took a risk. He gestured to the camp behind him, to the Scarens of all ages and conditions living together. Then he pointed to Silver, to himself, to the space between them. He was trying to communicate the concept of chosen family, of loyalty that transcended strength. The leader watched closely. Then he did something that shocked everyone. He lowered himself slightly, a gesture of respect, and departed without aggression or threat. He's thinking, Price said, her voice filled with scientific excitement. You have given him something to think about. 2 days later, 3 Scarens from the black-maned pack arrived. They were not warriors. One was elderly, limping badly. Another was a young female with a twisted foreleg. The third was painfully thin, clearly ill. They had been cast out, just like Silver had been, but this time, their former pack leader had pointed them towards sanctuary instead of leaving them to die alone. Silver accepted them without hesitation. David treated their injuries while Dr. Price documented everything. The black-maned leader was changing, even if slowly. He was learning that there were alternatives to the old brutal ways. More came. Not just outcasts now, but curious youngsters from traditional packs. They stayed for a few days, watching how Silver's pack operated, then returned to their own groups. David realized they were becoming ambassadors, spreading new ideas throughout Scaran society. Then came the test no one had anticipated. A distress signal reached the research camp. A human exploration team had crashed in the mountains 40 kilometers away. They were injured and trapped by a rock slide. The rescue team would not arrive for 3 days. Captain Brooks contacted David immediately. "Reed, we need someone who knows the terrain to guide a rescue party. Can you help?" David looked at Silver. "I can do better than that, Captain. I can bring help that knows this planet better than any human." Brooks was skeptical, but she agreed to let him try. David explained the situation to Silver using gestures, drawings in the sand, and the limited communication system they had developed. He showed her images of injured humans trapped and in danger. He drew a map to the crash site. Silver understood. She barked commands to her pack, and 12 of the strongest Scarans stepped forward. The elderly Gray approached David and made a complex gesture with his head. Permission and blessing, the journey took 8 hours. The Scarans carried supplies and makeshift harnesses David had designed. They navigated terrain that would have been impossible for humans, leaping across gaps and climbing steep slopes with natural grace. David rode on Silver's back when the ground was too difficult, trusting her completely. They found the crashed ship at dawn. 4 humans were trapped inside, injured but alive. The Scarans worked with David to carefully move debris, their strength and coordination making quick work of obstacles that would have taken humans days to clear. The trapped explorers were terrified at first, seeing Scarans up close, but David's calm guidance and Silver's gentle behavior gradually won them over. By the time Captain Brooks arrived with the rescue team, they found David and 4 grateful explorers being guarded by a pack of Scarans who had saved human lives. Brooks stepped out of her ship and stared at the scene in silence. Then she walked to David and extended her hand. "You have done something remarkable here, Reed. Not me, Captain. Silver and her pack. They chose to help even though humans are not their kind." Brooks turned to Silver, who watched the humans with calm intelligence. The captain, showing respect, bowed slightly. Silver dipped her head in return. The news spread across the colony within hours. Scarans had saved human lives. The creatures everyone feared had shown compassion and heroism. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Calls came in to study Silver's pack, to protect them, to learn from them. Dr. Price was overwhelmed with interview requests. Colonial government officials wanted briefings. Even the military expressed interest in potential cooperation with Scarans. David found himself at the center of something much larger than he had ever imagined. But through it all, he kept his focus on the pack. They did not care about fame or recognition. They cared about family, about having a place where they belonged, about building something better than what came before. One evening, the black-maned pack leader returned again. This time he brought his entire pack, but not for battle. They came in peace, with gifts of fresh kills. The leader approached Silver, and this time David saw submission in his posture. He was accepting her authority, acknowledging that her way was not weakness, but a different kind of strength. Silver welcomed them, not as rivals, not as subordinates, but as equals. The 2 packs began to merge, sharing food and space. Young ones from both groups played together. The old brutality was giving way to something new. Dr. Price stood beside David, watching history unfold. "Do you understand what you have accomplished? You have changed an entire species' cultural trajectory. Scarans will be different now, because of what you started here." David shook his head. "I just helped one injured mother and her cubs. Silver did the rest. She showed her people that there was another way to live. And you showed her that compassion existed beyond her species. David, that is the essence of what makes humans special. We do not just care for our own. We care for anyone who needs it." The cubs, now nearly full-grown, bounded over to David and knocked him down with enthusiastic affection. He laughed as they licked his face and pulled at his clothes, demanding attention. Silver watched with what David could only describe as pride. That night, both packs howled together, their voices joining in harmony that echoed across the entire canyon system. Other distant packs answered, and David imagined he could hear curiosity and hope in those far-off calls. Change was spreading. 3 months became 6 months, and 6 months became a year. David Reed never did return to flying cargo routes. Instead, he found his true purpose in the canyons of Talon 9. The research camp had grown into a permanent settlement. Humans and Scarens lived side by side, learning from each other in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. More buildings appeared, designed with input from both species. Scarens needed different spaces than humans, and the architecture reflected that cooperation. Silver's original pack now numbered over 80 members. The black-maned leader, whom everyone now called Shadow, had fully integrated his former pack into the new social structure. He was one of Silver's most trusted advisors. Proof that even deeply ingrained behaviors could change when given the right example. Dr. Price published paper after paper documenting the cultural revolution among the Scarens. Other xenobiologists arrived to study what everyone was calling the Silver Pack phenomenon. Universities requested data. Governments debated new policies for human-Scaran relations, but David cared less about the academic recognition and more about the daily miracles he witnessed. He saw young Scarens teaching their parents new cooperative hunting techniques. He watched elderly pack members being cared for with genuine affection instead of being abandoned. He observed disputes being resolved through communication rather than violence. The cubs were adults now, magnificent creatures who served as living bridges between species. They had grown up with humans as family, and they carried that understanding into their interactions with other Scarens. When new packs arrived seeking to understand this strange new way of life, Silver's cubs were often the first ambassadors. Captain Brooks visited regularly, bringing supplies and news from the wider colony. On one visit, she brought unexpected papers. Reed, the Colonial Council has created a new position, Official Liaison for Interspecies Cooperation. The salary is generous, the benefits include a permanent residence here, and the job description is essentially what you have been doing for the past year. Are you interested? David looked at Silver, who was resting nearby with her head on his lap. I accept, Captain. Brooks smiled. I thought you might. There is more. The Council wants to establish similar programs on other frontier worlds. They want you to help train people in interspecies communication and cooperation. Will I have to leave here? No, this is your base. Others will come to you to learn. You and Silver will teach them together. David felt pride swell in his chest. Silver is not just a subject to study, Captain. She is a teacher, a leader, and a revolutionary. She deserves recognition for what she has built. The Council knows. They are creating a formal designation for intelligent non-human species. Scarens will be the first to receive it. Full legal protections, recognition of their society, and guaranteed territory rights. Silver's pack will be protected under colonial law. That evening, David stood on the canyon rim watching the sunset. The settlement below was alive with activity. Human children played with young Scarens. Researchers shared data with elderly Scarens who had become unofficial historians of their people. Hunters from both species prepared for a cooperative expedition. Silver climbed the slope to stand beside him. She was older now, gray showing more prominently in her fur, but she moved with the same dignified grace. Her cubs followed her. Along with Shadow and several other pack leaders who had become her council, they stood together in silence. The human and the Scarens who had changed everything a year ago. David had been a simple cargo pilot with no purpose beyond moving goods from one planet to another. Silver had been an outcast mother watching her cubs starve. Both had been abandoned by the systems that should have supported them. Now they led a movement that was reshaping how two species understood each other. Dr. Price joined them on the rim, slightly out of breath from the climb. David, we just received word. 3 other frontier worlds have reported similar cultural shifts in their indigenous species. They saw news reports about Silver's pack, and they decided to try different approaches. cooperation instead of competition, compassion instead of cruelty. What you started here is spreading beyond this planet. Silver started it, David corrected. I just gave her the tools. You both did it, Price said firmly. That is the point. Neither species could have achieved this alone, but together you created something revolutionary. A message alert chirped on David's communicator. He checked it and smiled. Captain Brooks says a delegation from Earth wants to visit. They are studying successful interspecies cooperation models for application back home. Silver made her almost purring sound. David had learned to recognize it as amusement. She understood more human language than most people realized. After a year of constant exposure, she could follow simple conversations and even recognize written words as the stars began to appear. The entire settlement gathered in the central area. This had become tradition, the evening gathering where both species shared their day. Young humans told stories while Scarens listened with attention. Elderly Scarens shared wisdom through gesture and sound that humans had learned to interpret. Food was shared, problems were discussed, and plans were made for the next day. David watched a little human girl show a young Scaren how to draw pictures in the sand. The Scaren watched intently, then carefully tried to mimic the action. When it succeeded, both youngsters made sounds of joy that transcended language barriers. This was what David had fought for. Not scientific papers or government recognition or even his own survival. He had fought for this simple moment, where two completely different species could share joy and friendship without fear. Silver nudged his hand with her nose. David scratched behind her ears and she leaned into the touch. They had developed hundreds of small gestures like this, a private language built from trust and time. I would not trade this for anything, David said softly. Not for all the cargo routes in the galaxy. Silver looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes. Then she did something she had never done before. She carefully pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of ultimate trust and respect among Scarens. David closed his eyes and accepted the honor. Around them, the settlement lived and breathed with possibility. Humans and Scarens building something new together. Not perfect, not without challenges, but genuine and good and full of hope. Shadow approached and sat beside Silver. Other pack leaders joined them. The humans in David's research team gathered as well. Both species together, looking out at the stars that connected all their worlds. What comes next? Dr. Price asked. David smiled. We keep growing. We keep learning. We keep proving that compassion is stronger than fear, that cooperation beats competition, and that family is defined by choice, not biology. Silver howled and her pack joined in. The sound rolled across the canyons, carrying the message to distant packs. More voices answered, more distant every time, spreading the call across the entire continent. Change was no longer coming. Change had arrived, and it all began because one human crashed on a frontier planet and chose to save an abandoned mother and her cubs. That single act of compassion had sparked a revolution. David Reed looked at Silver, his friend and partner in this impossible adventure. She looked back with trust and affection. Whatever challenge X tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Human and Scaren. Two species that should have remained forever separate. But here they stood, proof that the greatest strength in the universe was not technology or weapons or power. It was the courage to care.